Hi YouTube, it's Kathy and this is my weekly entertainment wrap up for November 18th to 24th. This week I read 8 books, I watched 3 shows, and I listened to 1 book. You may have noticed I looked a little hesitant to call it 8 books because, well, one of them is definitely not one singular book, but we'll get to that. Also, I'd really like to preface this by saying that only one of those books was actually a novel, the rest were graphic novels. That being said, let's start off with my new favorite superhero, Faith. I read Volume 1, which is Hollywood and Vine, Volume 2, which is California Scheming, and Volume 3, which is Superstar. So this run of the comics is after she was a part of a group called the Renegades, which are a group of psiots who have special powers, basically. Her powers include flying and having a companion field, so basically she can use telekinesis to move things around. I was drawn to read this story because this superhero is fat and gives no fucks about it, and also is such a giant nerd, and I love her. There are so many nerdy references throughout these comics and it just makes me so happy. Basically, part of her backstory was her parents died. I think they might have been on the way to a Star Trek convention actually, just based on what I read in these comics, but I'm not 100% sure. And she was raised by her grandmother and read and watched a ton of sci-fi growing up. And then she found out she had powers, which is just cool. I really enjoyed these 3 volumes. Like I said, they are full of pop culture references, and then they've also have pop culture references that they've kind of changed slightly. So it's really fun to see her referencing Back to the Future, or saying Frack from Battlestar Galactica, or Gorham from Firefly, but then having the actor who's in all of the Hollywood films be called Chris Criswell. I think that was his name. It was something as equally ridiculous as that. Although I really enjoyed this story, I enjoyed the first 2 volumes way better than the 3rd volume. The 3rd volume kind of derailed at one point, and I understand why it did it. Basically, the first issue in that volume set up a storyline, and then the second issue was just before the 2016 election, so it was basically like, hey, get out there and vote. And I think it mostly just makes me really sad that America did not end up electing the candidate that they wanted you to vote for. Regardless though, I'm going to continue to read the comics until I run out of the comics at the library. I also wanted to mention that there is definitely a point in the comics where she's taking her sort of boyfriend to his first convention and they're both in cosplay, and then of course when things are going down, people don't believe that they're actually superheroes because everybody's in cosplay. And at one point the whole kill your double trope comes in and like which one is the evil one, and it is so great. On to a different graphic novel series that I read more than 1 volume of this week. That's Goldie Vance number 3 and 4. I've talked about this one before, obviously when I read issues 1 and 2, but this one is set in the 70s in Florida in a resort where Goldie works as a valet but also is a detective. She also has a really cute girlfriend, a mom who works as a mermaid, a dad who also works at the hotel, and a best friend who is brilliant. These comics really bring me back to my childhood of reading way too many Nancy Drew novels. Except, of course, in this we have confirmed queer characters and lots of people of color. I am kind of bummed that my library doesn't have any more volumes of this, so I'm going to have to go on the website and request that they get them ASAP so I can continue reading. I also finally picked up the first volume of Wayward, which is called String Theory, because one of my wonderful, always comments on every video, people told me to pick it up, and I finally got it from the library. This one follows a mixed-race girl named Rory who grew up in Ireland but whose mother is Japanese, and her parents divorced, so now she is moving to Japan and going to school there. And really all I want to tell you is when she gets there she kind of realizes that she might have some powers. This one was a very good introduction to a very interesting series, and it ended on a cliffhanger and I'm pretty mad about it, so I'm going to have to try to find the 2nd volume. I hope my library has all the volumes because these characters are really interesting. Also, I wanted to note the art style in this comic. I read the foreword and it is specific that it doesn't want to be the usual depiction of what we see in Japanese manga and Japanese comics. So it's not the usual characters and bright colors that we're used to seeing from Japanese media, and that's honestly incredibly refreshing. These are just people living their lives in a place that happens to be Japan. Also, Rory definitely takes after her dad as far as her hair goes, so her teachers think that she's dyed it and that's a problem there. And that scene made me uncomfortable and extremely angry on her behalf. In any case, if you like comics where things get weird really quickly, definitely check this one out. Now to finish up with the rest of the comics I read, I actually read the first 6 issues of the Haunted Mansion comic because my best friend realized that 1, it's my favorite Disney attraction, and 2, I read that other graphic novel that Disney put out for the Haunted Mansion at the beginning of the month because I meant to read it in October but didn't quite get to it. And she said, wait a second, is that the same thing as these? And she goes into her comic collection and pulls out these 6 single issues still in the sleeves, and I'm like, that is something different. Can I borrow those, please? This was a lot of fun. It was done by various different artists, and she actually only had it because a couple of the issues have art and storylines done by the same person that does the Lenore comics, the cute little dead girl comics, and you can definitely tell it's his comic style when you're looking at it. So these issues have tons of different little stories surrounding the Haunted Mansion, but then there's this one throughfare story through all 6 issues about Gracie and how he came to have this mansion, and it was a really good time. I have no idea if it's easy to find these anymore. When I was actually looking through Goodreads to see if I could actually add them to my Goodreads, it had all of the single issues, but they each had maybe a handful of people that had actually checked into them, so that made me feel special. I just love anything about the creepy lore of that attraction. Although I haven't seen the movie yet, but people have told me I'm not really missing anything. Finally, the novel I read this week was When the Moon Was Ours by Anna Marie McLemore. This is queer YA magical realism in a small town where one of the characters grows roses from her wrist, the other works at a pumpkin patch where all of the pumpkins are turning to glass, and a town official is being bribed so the school doesn't know that Samir's name on his birth certificate is actually Samira. This one is packed full with visual imagery, especially specific colors that come up again and again and again, especially in relation to these 4 sisters that are kind of the antagonists. They each have different hues of red hair and constantly different details and different colors of different items throughout the entire book are discussed. This is a love story where people are trying to protect each other, but they don't necessarily tell each other what's going on in their lives. The writing in this sometimes flows from one thing to another, and it made it slightly hard to follow at a couple of points. Mostly because I would think that I had missed something and I'd go back to reread the paragraph and realize that no, that's just how the writing was. It flows very quickly. So if you like your magical realism and you haven't read this one yet, I highly recommend you pick it up. Of course, I watched Survivor. I watched 3 different seasons of Survivor. I finished season 13. I was okay with who won, but I'm very glad that the runner-up comes back in 3 more seasons. We then started season 14, and I honestly can't remember too much about it, other than they're in Fiji, and the 2 tribes basically should be called the haves and the have-nots, because one is way stacked against the other in terms of winning challenges and then getting prizes. And then of course I stayed current on season 37, which is currently airing. That one is getting very interesting because all of the Davids realize that they actually have quite a few advantages up their sleeves. My roommate and I also started the 3rd season of Better Call Saul. Now, just before we started actually watching the episodes, I had to go back and read the Wikipedia entries for the first 2 seasons because I honestly did not remember. I actually think I watched those 2 seasons before I started doing this weekly series, which, you know, considering this is the 99th week, it was a while ago. Regardless, getting back into this was a lot of fun. This is a highly detailed world. We are personally enjoying how much of the story is told with very little dialogue. And then of course I also went to my friend's house so we could watch some Steven Universe. We finished the 1st season, so the big reveal that happens at the end of the 1st season I did not see coming, and that was amazing. I'm obviously not going to spoil it, but my friend, because she's doing this as a rewatch, then told me that there were lines previously that she was like, oh, when she said this line earlier, I suddenly knew exactly what that meant, but it was kind of a throwaway line because she didn't know what it meant when she watched it the first time, and yep, this show is pretty smart. There was one episode that nobody cared for. It was this weird crossover episode with this character named Uncle Grandpa, and we were like, this episode did not need to exist. I'm blocking it from my memory from now on. Bye. But other than that, this series continues to be incredibly adorable. I absolutely love Steven. He's just such a cinnamon roll of a character, and I can't wait to just continue watching all of the seasons. And then finally, the book that I listened to this week was Girls Made of Snow and Glass. This is a Snow White retelling, which I don't think I knew going into it. I think I just kind of picked something that was available as an audiobook from the library app on my phone, and then quickly realized that that's what it was, and it was really good. What made this retelling unique is it alternated between what would be the evil stepmother queen and the Snow White character. So to make it easier, the name of the evil stepmother queen was Mina, and the name of the Snow White character was Lynette. When Mina is about 16, she finds out that her father, who is a magician, is going to move them to the north. She doesn't really want to go, but her dad drops a bomb on her that she kind of has to do whatever he wants because when she was a kid, her heart failed and he replaced her heart with glass. So basically, if she doesn't do what he says, he can just break her heart. Literally. He's not a great guy. We don't like him. Also, because he's made her heart out of glass, she cannot feel love or be loved by other people, is what he tells her. Like I said, class A parenting. So we kind of alternate between Mina moving to the north and meeting the king and meeting his daughter, who is Linnet, and then Linnet when she's about 15 years old and what's going on then. I love the parallels between these two characters because just like Mina finds out that she has something about herself that she would have not been able to expect because magic, Linnet finds out something very similar around this time frame. The Huntsman was also a character in this adaptation. I really enjoyed how that was worked in. And in addition to this, there is a queer love interest for Linnet. An addition that I didn't know that I wanted until I saw it happening and went, ooh. Like I said, I went into this book actually knowing nothing about it and was very surprised to very much enjoy it. I love that since Snow White is a very dark fairy tale at its roots, that a lot of the imagery within this was also very dark, but it was also filled with a lot of hope and a lot of light. And I was fully satisfied with how this ended. In fact, if it had ended any other way, I don't think I would have enjoyed it as much. When we were getting near to the end, I was really hoping for this type of resolution, and that's what I got, and I was so glad for it. So if you're looking for a wintry read and you like your retellings of fairy tales, definitely give this one a shot. That's it for this week. Next week will actually be my 100th video in this series, and it will also go up on the first day of the Queer Lit Readathon. So this coming week I probably won't be reading too much because I have 12 books on my TBR for the Queer Lit Readathon, which I will link in places. I will have very little time for anything other than sleeping, working, and reading that week. Have you read, watched, or listened to any of these? Let me know about it down in the comments below. On the way down to the comments, if you hit that subscribe button, that would be very nice of you. You can like and share this as you see fit, and I will see you very soon. Bye!